Today we are going to talk about multiplying decimals. What you have learned so far is dealing with what we call whole numbers. For instance, a number like 0 or a number like 5 or 216, these are called whole numbers, which the way we show it is that we use the capital letter W to represent the set that these numbers are coming from. One thing you have to remember is that you can add a 0 before a whole number and the number doesn't change. For instance, 153 is the same as 153, or is the same as 5 zeros before 153. You always get the same number, which is 153. But you cannot add a 0 after a whole number because the number changes. For instance, 153 and 153 0, which is 1530, they are totally different numbers. So remember, a whole number, you can add 0 before the number without changing the number. We now define a new set of numbers which we call decimal numbers. Now, decimal numbers are numbers that they have a decimal point. For instance, 1.06, it has a decimal at this location. 2.33 is another number with a decimal at this location, and 1.0 is another one. These are called decimal numbers. Decimal numbers are really like fractions, but the denominator is either 10, 100, 1000, 10,000, and so forth. For instance, 1.0. You can see that the decimal point is one placeholder to the left. So this means that 1.0, I can write it as 10, which is number 1.0 without decimal, divided by, because it's one decimal point to the left, I divide it by 10. Another example, 2.33 is the same as 233. Now, there are two digits after the decimal points, 3 and 3. So this means I have to divide 233 by 100. The next one, let's say, is 1.06. 1.06 is the same as 106, but there are two decimal points to the right of the decimal, so this means divide by 100. So this is another way of representing fractions with the denominators, which is a multiple of 10. Now, one thing you have to remember about decimal numbers, is that you can add 0, and you can add 0 before and after the number. For instance, this means that 15.3 is the same as 15.3, is the same as 5 zeros before 15.3, is the same as 15.30, a 0 after 15.3, or you can have 5 zeros after 15.3. It doesn't change the number. But remember, in a whole number, you can add zeros before the whole number, but you can't add it after. But with decimal points, you can add zeros after and before the number. Another thing that you have to remember is that with the whole numbers, we can change it to a decimal number just by adding a decimal at the end of the number. For instance, if you look at 13, I can write 13 as 13 point. You may be wondered why there is no digit after the decimal point. It is understood that when there is no digit, the digits are all zeros. So 13 point is equal to 13.0 is the same as 13.00 or 13.000 as many number of zeros as you want. So it's very important. You can change a decimal, you can change a whole number to a decimal by just adding a decimal point at the end of the number. Now let's do some examples here. The first one is to add a whole number and a decimal number. For instance, 2 added to 3.01. The way we add it, either you write 3.01 first and then 2, or you write 2 first and then 3.01. But the whole point is to make sure that the decimal points are aligned. So I'm going to write 3.01 first. So I'm going to write 3.01. Now to write 2, because 2 doesn't have any decimal point and 3.01 has 2 decimal points, I'm going to add a decimal point at the end of the 2 and add 2 zeros to it. So 2.00. Remember that you can change any whole number like 2 to a decimal number by just adding a decimal point, and you can add as many zeros after the decimal point at the end of the number. So I can write 2 as 2.00. Just make sure that these decimal points, they are aligned together, right on top of each other. Now I'm going to add them like adding, usual whole numbers. I'm going to say 1 plus 0 is 1, 0 plus 0 is 0, then it's going to be a decimal point, then 2 plus 3 is going to give me 5. You see how easy it is to add 2 decimal numbers, or a whole number and a decimal numbers. Now let's do the next example. We have to add 3.15 and 12.9. So I'm going to align the decimal points, and I'm going to write the first number with the most number of decimal digits. So 3.15 first. And then I'm going to write 12.9, but I'm going to make sure that these decimal points are aligned. So this is the decimal point. Now 12.9 becomes like this. Now you may say, 3.15 has 2 decimal points and 12.9 has only 1. How can I add these two numbers? Remember that you can add zeros before and after decimal numbers. So I can add a 0 here, I can add a 0 here. Now I have 4 digits for each one of these numbers, and I can just add them easily. I can say 5 plus 0 is 5. 9 plus 1 is 10, so it becomes 0, and there is a 1 carry over. 1 plus 3 is 4, 4 plus 2 is 6. And then the decimal point comes down, and then 0 plus 1 is 1. So the sum of 12.9 and 3.15 is just 16.05. The next example is the subtraction of 2 decimal numbers. To do that one, what you do is that you first write the larger or decimal number and then the smaller one after that. So I'm going to write 302.003 first, and then I want to subtract it. I subtract from this number 22.9. But again, I have to make sure that the decimal points are aligned. So decimal point goes here, and then I have 22 and then 9. And then I want to subtract. Now, to do the subtraction, you can see that after 9 there is no zeros, and before 22 is also there is no zeros. But 302.003 has digits which are 0, 3, and also 3 at the beginning. So to fix the problem, I add a 0 here, and I add a 0 here and a 0 here. Remember, you can add the zeros before and after the decimal number. So now I have enough number of digits in the first and second row, and I start subtracting as usual. So I'm going to say 3 minus 0 gives me 3. 0 minus 0 gives me 0. Now, I cannot subtract 9 from 0. So I'm going to borrow 1 from 2 here. So 2 becomes 1, and this 0 becomes 10. So 10 minus 9 becomes 1. And then the decimal point, I cannot subtract 2 from 1. So I'm going to go to the left and I see 0. I cannot borrow anything from 0, so I go to the left column again. So I borrow 1 from this guy. This becomes 2. This 0 becomes 10. Still, I cannot subtract 2 from 1. So I borrow 1 from this guy, so it becomes 9. And this becomes, it was 1, and I borrowed 10 or 1 from the left column. So this becomes 11. 11 minus 2 is 9. 9 minus 2 is 7. And 2 minus 0 becomes 2. So the answer becomes 279.103. Now, if I ask you to write this number in decimal, you write it as 279.103 divided by, if you look here, there are 3 digits after decimal. So this corresponds to the number 1000. In the next example, we have to multiply 2 decimal numbers. The numbers are 5.8 and 9.7. The multiplication is exactly like decimal, exactly like whole numbers. The first thing you do is you drop the decimal points. So I'm going to say I have to multiply 58 by 97. So I start doing the multiplication. 7 times 8 is 56. So 6 here, 5 is carried over. 7 times 5 is 35, plus 5 gives me 40. Now I'm going to multiply 9 times 8. 9 times 8 is 72, so it's 2 here. And then 7 is carried over. 9 times 5 is 45, plus 7 is 52. So it becomes 52. Now I'm going to add them up. So 6 plus nothing is 6. 0 plus 2 is 2. 4 plus 2 is 6. And 5 is 5. Now, I just look at the previous 2 numbers. I can see that the first number, which is 5.8, the decimal point is 1 decimal point, and the next one is also 1, meaning that there is 1 digit after the decimal point, which is 7, and 1 digit after the decimal point on the first one is just 8. So there are 2 decimal points. So I'm going to place the decimal points 2 digits, which is right here. So I say that the result of multiplication here is 56.26. The next example, 0.9 times 6.8. As usual, I'm going to write the numbers without the decimal points. So I'm going to say 9 and then 68. I have to multiply this. Now to do this one, very simple. I'm just going to multiply like whole numbers. So I'm going to say 9 times 8 is 72. There is no other digit. And then 6 times 9 is 54. And I shift it to the left, so it's 54 here. Then 2 becomes 2. 7 plus 4 is 11. So 1 and 1 is carry over. So 1 plus 5 is 6. 612. Now 0.9 has one digit after the decimal. 6.8 has one digit after the decimal. So the decimal point in the result has to be 2 digits after that point. So it's going to be right here. So the answer is 6.12. In the next example, we have to multiply 0.5 times 0.4. Again, we drop the decimal point, so we get 0.5 times 0.4. But remember that the 0 before a whole number doesn't mean anything, so I can just ignore these zeros here. So the question is that what is 5 times 4, which is 20? Now, 5 is 1 after the decimal, 4 is 1 after the decimal, so there are 2 decimal points I have to have. So this means that I have to have a decimal point right here, 2 digits after the decimal point. The next example is 1.23 times 2. Again, we drop the decimal points and we write it as 123 times 2. 2 times 3 gives me 6. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 1 is 2. Now, there are 2 digits after the decimal and there is no decimal in 2. So this means I have to have my decimal points right here, which corresponds to 2 digits after the decimal point. The next example is a word problem. We have Carla, which drives to work, which is 7.6 kilometers. She does this one 5 times a week. The question is that how many kilometers does Carla drive in a 5-day work week? So this means that I have to add 7.6 5 times. But we know that multiplication is repeated addition. So I just need to multiply 5 by 7.6. So I'm going to drop the decimal points and I'm going to write 76 times 5. And I'm going to multiply. 5 times 6 is 30, so 0. 3 is carried over. 5 times 7 is 35, plus 3 is 38. Now, 7.6 has the decimal points to the left of first digit, and 5 doesn't have any decimal point. So this means that I have to have a decimal point right here. So the answer is 38.0 or the same as 38. Remember, 0 after the decimal point doesn't mean anything because I can write this one as 380 divided by 10. Remember, because there is only one digit after the decimal point, I have to divide it by 10. So that's the answer, 38 kilometers. The next and the last example says that you have a rectangular plot of land, something like this one, which is 30.5 by 5.3 meters. So this is 30.5 and this is 5.3 meters. We are supposed to find the area of the plot. We know that the area of a rectangle is length times width. So I have to find area is equal to 30 times 5, 30.5 times 5.3. Again, I write the two numbers without the decimal points, so it's 305 and 53, and I start multiplying. 3 times 5 is 15. 1 is carried over. 3 times 0 is 0 plus 1 is 1. 3 times 3 is 9. 5 times 5 is 25, so 2. Then the 2 is carried over. 5 times 0 is 0 plus 2 is 2. And 5 times 3 is 15. So my answer is 5, 6. 9 plus 2 is 11. 1 carry over. 1 plus 5 is 6. And then 1. Now, if I look at the numbers, I have one digit after the decimal here, which is 5. One digit after the decimal here, which is 3. So there are two digits after the decimal. So the answer is I have to put the decimal 2 digits to the right of the decimal. So it's 161.65 square meter, which is the area of the land.